The knock came just before midnight, sharp as a gunshot against the rattling wood of the cabin door, and it cut through the roar of the winter storm like a warning from the plains themselves. Talon, the Lakota warrior, rose from where he had been crouched near the fire, his hand instinctively brushing the worn handle of his hunting knife. Few visitors came this far into the wilderness. Fewer still in a blizzard that turned the world white and swallowed the prairie whole. He stood there for a moment, listening. The flames hissed and cracked behind him, throwing long shadows against the log walls. The wind screamed against the shutters, threatening to tear them loose, but beneath that, there it was again, another knock. Softer this time, but urgent. Like a heartbeat against wood. Talon opened the door and the storm nearly shoved him back. Snowflakes rushed in, swirling, biting against his bare skin. And in the pale light of the moon, he saw them, two women standing close together, trembling. In the cold. They were not prairie ghosts, though the storm had tried to make them so. Their dresses were torn and stiff with frost, their boots caked with ice, their cheeks flushed to a dangerous red. One woman clutched the other as if holding her upright. Their eyes wide wet, desperate, found him at once. The taller of the two spoke first. Her voice cracked but carried, as if she had spent every last ounce of strength saving it for this moment. You will have to sleep with us," she said, words shivering out of her lips like fragile glass. "Or we will freeze before dawn." The fire inside hissed louder, as though mocking the silence that followed. Talon's scarred hands tightened around the doorframe. He had fought soldiers on horseback, survived winters with nothing but a bow and a blanket, and buried more kin than he dared count. He had seen hunger strip men of their pride, seen grief hollow them until they were nothing but shadows. But never had he faced a plea so raw, so unguarded, so utterly human that the shorter woman swayed, nearly collapsing into the snow. Her lips were pale, her eyes half shut, and she clung to her companion like a child. Talon reached forward, his strong arm steady as he caught her before she fell. Her body was stiff as a board, shaking violently with the cold. "Inside," he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying both command and concern. He ushered them across the threshold and closed the door against the storm's howl. The cabin filled again with the scent of smoke and pine, a fragile bubble of warmth against the endless cold outside. The taller woman laid her friend down near the hearth, rubbing her hands furiously. "June," she whispered. "Stay with me." June. Talon crouched beside them, his dark eyes studying their faces in the flickering firelight. The taller one, her hair loose and tangled with snowflakes, her skin pale from cold, met his gaze. There was strength in her stare, even through the desperation. "My name is Eliza," she said, voice steadier now. "This is June, my sister." Talon nodded once, acknowledging. He fetched a buffalo hide from his bunk and wrapped it around June, tucking it beneath her chin. Her shallow breathing fogged the air, but already the warmth of the fire and the weight of the hide seemed to stir a bit of color back into her cheeks. Eliza kept her hands on her sister, eyes darting toward the warrior man. Her words hung heavy in the air, impossible to ignore. "We don't ask this out of shame," she said, her voice breaking. "We ask it out of life." Talon stood slowly, the firelight painting the planes of his face in bronze and shadow. He moved to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtain just enough to peer into the white blur of the night. The storm showed no mercy. Snowdrifts were already climbing high against the cabin walls. Wolves would be out there too, pacing in the dark, patient as hunger itself. He let the curtain fall. The women's fate, it seemed, was now bound to his, Eliza's. Words replayed in his head, words no man expected to hear in such a way. "In such a place, you will have to sleep with us." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Talon turned back to them, his broad shoulders filling the room, the air charged with a weight heavier than the storm. He did not answer yet. His silence stretched like a drawn bow, taut, dangerous dot, and in that silence, Eliza's eyes did not waver. For though she was trembling, though fear had carved lines into her face, she was ready to fight for life, even if it meant asking the unthinkable of a stranger. The night had only just begun. Talon rose from his crouch beside the fire, his shadow stretching long across the cabin walls. The storm outside beat like war drums against the wood, every gust rattling the shutters as though some restless spirit clawed to come in. The Lakota. Warrior's dark eyes studied the women carefully. Eliza, who sat upright, shoulders squared despite her trembling, and June, who lay half-conscious under the buffalo hide, her lips tinged blue from the cold. Their breath mingled with the smoke of the hearth, fogging the cabin air with the smell of damp wool, pine, and desperation. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "We are not here by choice," she said softly. "The storm caught us on the trail. Our wagon, it has gone beneath the snow." June can barely walk. Her words came measured, each one weighted like a stone. But behind them, Talon heard something deeper fear she refused to voice, fear of what the night might still steal. From them, Talon turned, reached for a kettle, and set it over the flames. The scent of scorched iron filled the room as he poured in melted snow from a clay jug. He moved with the steady grace of a man used to survival, but his silence gnawed at Eliza. "You heard me," she pressed, voice trembling now. "You will have to sleep with us. We cannot. We will not survive without your warmth." The words hung in the cabin like smoke, impossible to ignore. Talon's jaw tightened. His people knew the law of fire and flesh in winter. It was not shame, it was not sin, but life. He remembered his grandmother's words spoken long ago by firelight. Heat is the spirit of survival. To share it is to honor life. To deny it is to let death win. But the world outside this cabin was no longer his grandmother's. The world of the white towns and the prairies was crueler, quick to call savagery what was simply survival. And here sat two women, faces pale with cold, yet eyes fierce with pride. Eliza broke the silence again, her voice lower now, almost pleading. "If you are a man of honor, then help us live through the night. I will not lose my sister to this storm." Her words stung him. Honor. That word had been ripped from him years ago when soldiers burned his village and left him with nothing but ash and scars. Yet, here it was again demanding he act, demanding he choose. He crouched down beside June, gently pressing two fingers to her neck. Her pulse was weak, fluttering like a bird trapped in a cage. He brushed a strand of frozen hair from her cheek. "Her blood runs slow," he muttered. "If we do not act soon, she will not see the morning." Eliza's hands trembled as she clutched her sister tighter. Her eyes, though, locked onto his. "Then you know what must be done." For the first time since opening his door to them, Talon's expression softened. He saw not two intruders, not burdens, but two lives balanced on the knife edge of death. He had seen men fall in battle with less fight in them than Eliza showed now, holding on to hope with white-knuckled hands. He rose and pulled another hide from his bunk, throwing it over the women. Then he sat across from them, firelight painting his chest in shifting shades of bronze. The necklaces and beads at his throat caught the light, casting faint glimmers that seemed to dance with the flames. "You know what you ask," he said at last, his deep voice steady but heavy. "You ask me to cross a line the world beyond. These walls would never forgive. If anyone knew, they would say you were ruined. They would call me savage. They would not care for truth." Eliza swallowed hard. "Let them say what they will. They are not here. The storm is. Death is." The storm howled louder, rattling the roof as if to prove her point. Talon leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. The determination, the pride, the glimmer of fear. It reminded him of women in his own people, women who carried strength in silence, who bore burdens no man would ever understand. Finally, he gave a single slow nod. Then we do this as my people do. Not as shame. Not as sin, as survival. Eliza exhaled shakily, her shoulders sagging as though she had been holding her breath for hours. She took his hand scarred, calloused, strong, and pressed it to her sister's cold fingers. "Then help me keep her alive," she whispered. The fire cracked, the wind roared, and in that small cabin on the edge of the frozen prairie, the Tinkoujin Prairie, Warrior and the two sisters entered a pact not of choice, but of life. The night was far from over, but the decision had been made. The fire roared louder as Talon added another log, sparks spiraling up the chimney into the storm scream. The flames painted the cabin in restless shades of orange and gold, and for a moment it looked less like a shelter and more like a battlefield, shadows clashing against the walls, light burning in fleeting bursts before giving way to darkness. Talon turned back toward the two sisters. June lay still under the buffalo hide, her breathing shallow but steady now, each inhale rattling like a rusted hinge. Her lips, though pale, no longer bore the lifeless blue they had when she'd staggered across his threshold. Eliza knelt beside her, rubbing her sister's hands furiously, her face a portrait of stubborn defiance against the storm that sought to claim them. She lifted her gaze to Talon, firelight dancing in her eyes. "You said your people see no shame in this," she whispered. "That it is survival." Talon remained silent, crouching low, his scarred hands stretched toward the flames. The crackle filled the space where words might have been. In truth, the memories clawing through his mind were louder than any storm. He saw himself years ago, younger, sitting in the broken remains of a tipi with his wife. Snow had fallen through the torn hide, their fire dying low, her body shivering violently against his chest. He had held her tight, whispering promises of spring, of warmth, of tomorrow. She had closed her eyes that night and never opened them. Again, he shook his head, forcing the memory back into its grave. He would not watch death come again, not when there was still a fight to be made. His eyes found Eliza again. She was not like the women of his tribe, yet the strength in her stare was familiar. It was the strength of someone who had lost too, much already, and refused to lose more. "You understand what you ask?" Talon said at last, his deep voice rolling like distant thunder. Eliza's hands did not stop moving against her sister's, but her chin lifted, her resolve sharpening. "I understand more than you think. We are alone in this storm. The town left us with nothing but debts and whispers. Our wagon is gone. June?" Her voice broke and she steadied it with sheer will. "She cannot survive this night without you." The warrior studied her a long while. Her words were not born of weakness but of brutal truth. He rose and crossed the small cabin, his broad shoulders filling the space, the firelight flickering across. The lines of muscle and scars carved into his skin. His long black hair swayed as he crouched beside June, adjusting the buffalo hide to cover her fully. She stirred faintly, her lips parting with a soft sound, a child's whimper in a woman. Grown too weary to fight the cold, Talon pressed his palm against her forehead. Still cold, too cold. He knew what must be done. His eyes shifted back to Eliza. "If we do this, it is not as the townsfolk believe. It is not as gossip or sin. It is life given from one body to another, fire shared through flesh. Do you understand?" Eliza's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, but she nodded. Her eyes glistened, though whether from the smoke or the weight of his words, Talon could not tell. The fire snapped loudly, and for a moment the only sound was the storm clawing at the roof. Eliza reached for her sister, pulling June closer. Then she turned her face toward the warrior, her expression caught somewhere between fear and determination. "Then help me. Help us both. Do not let her slip away." Talon inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night pressing down. His ancestors had always said the fire within a warrior was not meant only for war, it was meant for life, to shield those who could not shield themselves. He had thought himself alone in this world, a last ember of a dying flame. But here, in this cabin, with these two desperate sisters, that ember glowed hot again. He pulled the hides wider, motioning for Eliza to bring June beneath them. The storm wailed as if in protest, but inside the cabin, warmth began to gather. Fragile yet real. For the first time, Eliza's fierce mask cracked. A single tear slid down her cheek as she whispered, "Thank you." Talon did not answer. He only drew them closer, the heat of his body mingling with theirs, the firelight flickering like a heartbeat. The night was long, the storm merciless, but within the circle of hides, within the shared warmth of three souls, a fragile fire was lit, one that death itself would have to fight to snuff out. The cabin was quiet now, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft hiss of melting snow dripping from the roof. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but within, a fragile stillness had settled, almost sacred in its weight. Talon leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling like a great drum, muscles taut from the night's strain. He was a man carved by war, famine, and exile, but even he felt the weight of this storm pressing against him, pressing against them all. Eliza sat beside June, still holding her sister close. Her fingers rubbed against June's frost-stiffened hands, pressing warmth back into bones that had nearly surrendered to the cold. Even so, her gaze constantly flicked toward Talon, wary but grateful. There was something in his presence that made the cabin feel less like a trap and more like a shield against the merciless prairie. Talon's dark eyes drifted toward the women, then closed briefly, and memories clawed their way forward. He remembered another night, long ago, under a sky just as harsh. Soldiers had driven his village from their land, fire devouring homes and hearts alike. He had held his wife that night, her body shivering violently, the cold biting through what little shelter remained. He had wrapped himself around her, pressed warmth into her like a prayer, whispering that spring would come again. But the dawn had brought silence. She never saw another sunrise. The memory left a hollow ache in his chest, one that never truly healed. But tonight, those shadows reminded him of the stakes. He would not allow Eliza or June to become another ghost under a prairie sky. He would not let the storm claim them as it had claimed so many others. Eliza finally broke the silence, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You saved us," she said. The words weighted with gratitude and something else, fear, pride, disbelief. I don't know how to repay you." Talon shook his head, brushing a strand of black hair back from his face. "Repayment is not needed. You survived the night. That is enough." His eyes lingered on June, who stirred faintly, shivering under the hide. "But life is never given freely. You owe it to yourselves to hold it, even if it costs everything. Else." Eliza looked at him, the firelight dancing across her determined features. "We will. We have no choice, but we are not used to this. To someone giving without expectation, without fear." Talon's lips pressed into a thin line. Expectations are the world's chains. Here, there is only survival. Only the fire. We share. The fire snapped and sparks danced upward like fleeting stars. Eliza's gaze followed them, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, trusting in the warmth of the room, in the strength of the warrior beside her. June shifted. Under the hide, curling slightly against her sister's chest. Her eyes flickered open, faint blue now returning to life. Thaug. Exhaustion still weighed heavily. Talon reached for another hide, draping it across the two women. The rough texture scratched against their skin, but it carried warmth and protection, a simple barrier against the storm that could easily claim them. He placed his hands near June, pressing heat into her fingers, then withdrew, giving space while maintaining vigilance. Eliza's voice trembled, though she tried to mask it with determination. "You carry ghosts," she said softly. "I see them in your eyes. You have survived?" "Much more than anyone should." Talon's gaze hardened slightly, shadowed by the past. "We all carry them. Some are buried, some follow like wolves, and some find you when you least expect." He paused, looking at the fire. "Tonight, we bury none. We fight, we survive." The storm outside moaned, shaking the cabin with relentless force. But within, a fragile bubble had formed. 3 lives won. Warrior, 2 sisters bound together not by choice, but by necessity. The heat of the fire, the shared warmth of bodies, the simple act of staying alive had forged a connection that neither could fully name, but all recognized. Eliza pressed her face to June's hair, whispering, "We made it this far. Tomorrow, we keep going." Talon nodded silently, his eyes scanning the cabin, the fire, and the snow beyond. The night had been long, filled with fear and difficult choices, but the morning would come. And with it, perhaps, the chance to continue living, not just surviving. For now, they held each other in the circle of firelight, 3 souls against the world, against the storm, against the past. Shadows lingered, memories haunted, but within that small cabin, life persisted. And for the first time that night, it felt possible that they might see another sunrise. The wind outside screamed like a pack of wolves, rattling the cabin's wooden walls and driving snow through every crack it could find. The storm had grown relentless, a frozen white tide that swallowed the prairie and threatened to erase everything in its path. Inside, Talon crouched by the fire, muscles tensed, chest heaving. His long black hair clung damply to his skin, and the tribal beads and feathers around his neck caught the flickering flames, casting dancing shadows across the cabin. Eliza sat beside June, pressing her sister against the warmth of the buffalo hides. June shivered violently, and Eliza's hands rubbed her arms and legs in desperate circles, willing heat into her frozen body. Talon's eyes never left them, scanning the cabin, listening for sounds outside: wolves, broken branches, anything that might signal danger, but the real danger was the cold that crept invisibly, determined to take them all. Hours passed, marked only by the fire's occasional crackle and the storm's roar. Talon moved carefully, adjusting the hides around the women, positioning his body so that as much heat as possible could reach them without crushing or suffocating. Every movement was precise, deliberate, a dance he had learned through decades of survival in the wilderness. He could feel Eliza's trembling hands on June, her anxiety palpable, but her determination unyielding. "Hold her close," he murmured, voice low and gravelly. "Close enough that warmth travels. Don't let her drift into the cold." Eliza nodded silently, pressing her cheek to her sister's hair, whispering comforting words that were barely audible over the howl of the storm. June's breathing gradually grew steadier, each inhale less ragged than before. Talon leaned back on his heels for a moment, letting his muscles stretch and relax, but his eyes never wavered from the women. Survival demanded vigilance, and he had learned that the prairie could not be trusted. Outside, snow piled higher against the cabin walls. The wind shrieked, shaking the roof as if it wanted to tear the structure apart. Talon could feel the raw power of nature pressing against him, but within the cabin, the firelight created a fragile barrier, a bubble of warmth, life, and hope. He glanced at Eliza, noting the strain in her shoulders, the deep lines of worry on her face. She had carried herself with courage, but exhaustion weighed heavily now. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The storm does not frighten you, you do not yield." Eliza looked up at him, surprised at the words. Her blue eyes, rimmed red from cold and fear, met his dark, steady gaze. There was an unspoken understanding there, recognition that both had fought long battles to survive, though in very different ways. The hours stretched endlessly. Talon shifted slightly, making room closer to the fire, ensuring June's body temperature continued to rise. He pressed a warm hand against her arm, then withdrew, careful not to overstep boundaries, yet instinctively knowing that his presence alone lent strength and protection. Eliza leaned closer to him, her lips moving in hushed prayers that he could not understand but could feel the cadence of hope, the rhythm of survival. Her fingers grazed his arm, not in accusation or fear, but in acknowledgement. They were bound in this struggle, three souls holding on to life in a world determined to take it away. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the frost-covered window, June's shivering had slowed to occasional tremors. Eliza's hands were raw from rubbing, but her spirit was unbroken. Talon rose slightly, stretching his back, every muscle defined, glistening with sweat and exertion. The storm had not won. They had survived another night. For a moment, the three of them simply sat there, a fragile circle of warmth in the middle of the storm, breathing together, feeling the fire seep slowly into their bones. Outside, the blizzard's fury still raged, but within the cabin, life had taken hold. The night had been long, grueling, and merciless, but it had also forged an unspoken bond between them. Talon looked at Eliza and June, his chest heaving, eyes steady. "The night tried to take you," he said, voice low and unwavering. "But we are still here, still alive, and we will stay that way." Eliza nodded, brushing a strand of damp hair from her sister's face. "Thanks to you," she whispered, though her words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken feelings. The fire crackled again, sending sparks upward, and the cabin seemed to breathe with them. Three survivors holding back the cold and the storm. The long night was not yet over, but they had proven to themselves that they could endure. Together. The first light of dawn seeped through the frost-covered window, pale and hesitant, struggling against the lingering storm. Outside, the prairie was buried beneath thick, unbroken drifts of snow, and the wind still roared like a living thing. Inside the cabin, the air was warmer now, softened by the shared heat of three bodies and a fire that had burned low but steady all night. Talon sat back on his heels, chest heaving, muscles taut from hours of vigilance. The storm had tested him, tested the women, and yet here they were alive. He glanced at June first. Her pale lips had begun to flush with color, her breathing steadier, and she had finally closed her eyes, drifting in a shallow, frost-soothed sleep. Eliza, however, remained wide awake. Her blue eyes, bright despite exhaustion, never left her sister. She pressed a hand against June's shoulder, brushing snow-damp hair from her face, whispering a quiet prayer in a language Talon did not understand but felt in the rhythm of her breath. Talon's gaze shifted to the window. The storm had spent much of its fury, leaving only a harsh, brittle wind that bent the skeletal branches of the prairie trees. He could see tracks wolves, perhaps, or stray cattle lost in the blizzard circling near the remains of their wagon, now buried beneath the snow. He tensed, instinctively rising to check, but the cabin offered some protection, and the women would not survive if he left them too exposed. "You made it through the night," he said finally, his voice low and steady, cutting through the quiet. Eliza turned to him, surprised at the sound. His dark eyes were tired but unwavering. "The storm tried to take you." But it failed. Eliza's lips quivered with emotion. "We owe you everything," she whispered, though her voice carried. More than gratitude, it carried fear, relief, and the fragile hope of survival. Talon shook his head, his long black hair falling over his shoulders. "You owe nothing but the promise to keep living," he said. His bronze skin glistened in the firelight, muscles relaxed slightly now, yet every movement radiated strength. Tribal jewelry beaded necklaces, carved bone armbands, and feathered accents glimmered with a soft shine, catching the flicker of the embers. He moved closer to Eliza and June, crouching down to adjust the hides and blankets around them. The warmth from his body mixed with theirs, creating a fragile circle of life in the harsh winter. June stirred again, murmuring softly, and Eliza leaned forward instinctively, smoothing her sister's hair. "The town will not understand," Eliza said after a pause, voice trembling slightly. "They will call us ruined. They will call you a savage." Talon's jaw tightened. "Let them call what they will. Outside, the storm will not care. And here, inside, you are alive. That is enough." Eliza swallowed, her eyes glistening with tears. "You saved us when no one else would. You kept us from dying in the snow." He merely nodded, leaning back slightly, letting the fire warm his shoulders. "Survival has no laws beyond what is needed to live," he said. "We shared the fire. That is all. Nothing more, nothing less." Outside, the sun began to break through the gray horizon, turning the snow into sheets of blinding white and silver. The world was harsh and unyielding. But within the cabin, life had been protected, nurtured. Eliza felt the weight of the night lift slightly, replaced with cautious hope. June's breathing deepened, more steady now, and she shifted closer to her sister instinctively. The fire crackled one last time, sending a burst of sparks upward. As if marking the end of their ordeal, Talon rose, every muscle flexing as he stretched. He moved to the window again, scanning the horizon, eyes sharp and alert. Tracks of wolves were scattered across the snow, but they seemed to be retreating, discouraged by the cabin's presence. He turned back toward the women, chest rising and falling, a silent promise in his gaze. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we continue. We survive. Together." Eliza nodded, pressing her hand against June's hair one last time. The long, merciless night had passed. The fire, the warmth, and the warrior's vigilance had saved them. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe they might see another sunrise dot in that small cabin on the frozen prairie. 3 lives had intertwined in the face of the storm. The long night was over, but the journey was far from done. And Talon, the warrior with scars deeper than the snow outside, would ensure they saw the next dawn. The storm had finally spent its fury, leaving the prairie blanketed in thick, unbroken snow that shimmered like crushed glass under the weak morning sun. The wind still whispered across the hills, but the violent howl of the previous night was gone, leaving a calm almost sacred in its stillness. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling. Talon sat cross-legged near the hearth, chest rising and falling steadily, every muscle relaxed yet alert. His long black hair fell over his broad shoulders, and tribal jewelry-beaded necklaces, carved bone armbands, and feather accents caught the pale light in faint glimmers. The warrior had spent the night ensuring that the 2 women survived, his vigilance unwavering, and now he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Eliza knelt beside June, brushing frost-damp hair from her sister's face. June had regained much of her color, her breath steady, though exhaustion lingered in the depth of her blue eyes. "We made it," Eliza whispered, a mix of disbelief and gratitude in her voice. "We actually made it." Talon's gaze swept across the room, noting every detail, the worn floorboards, The curling smoke, the faint outlines of snow drifting through the cracks in the walls. The world outside was merciless, yet within these logs life had persevered. He nodded once, his voice low but commanding. You survived because you fought, because you refused to surrender to the storm. That is what matters. Eliza's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. You saved us, she said softly. Not just from the storm, from dying alone in the snow. You gave us life when the world had abandoned us. Talon shifted slightly, his scarred hands brushing embers from the hearth. Life is not given freely, he murmured. It is taken and protected. Tonight I chose to protect. That is all. June stirred under the blankets, blinking slowly, her gaze finding Talon's. I feel warm now, she said, voice weak but steady. She tried to sit up and Eliza helped her, supporting her weight against the buffalo hides. Outside, the snow glimmered under the pale morning sun, untouched and pristine, yet dangerous in its hidden depths. Talon rose, muscles flexing under his bronze skin, and moved to the window, scanning the horizon. Wolf tracks crisscrossed the prairie, and the remnants of their buried wagon lay like a frozen memory of what almost claimed them. He let his gaze linger, then returned to the women, eyes sharp, unwavering. Eliza's voice trembled as she spoke. Again, her fingers brushing her sister's hair. We don't even know your name, she said. Talon's dark eyes softened. Talon, he said simply. It is enough that you remember it. Nothing else matters. The room fell silent for a moment, the kind of silence that carries understanding without the need for words. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, 3 lives had forged a bond in the firelight, in the snow, in the struggle. To survive. Eliza finally let herself exhale fully, pressing her forehead to June's shoulder. We owe you everything, she whispered, voice breaking, yet filled with strength. And yet, we have only each other now thanks to you. Talon approached, crouching down to their level, his broad shoulders casting shadows across the cabin floor. You owe nothing, he said quietly. The fire we shared, the warmth we gave, that is enough. You live, you fight. That is repayment enough. June reached out her small, cold hand, placing it against Talon's. He held it for a moment, warmth passing between them, a silent promise of protection, of life reclaimed from the storm. Eliza smiled faintly, a fragile, triumphant smile. Then we step forward, she said, together, into the light, into life. Talon rose, every muscle taut and alive, standing like a sentinel against the world. Outside, the prairie glowed silver under the new sun, the storm's shadow finally lifted. The cabin, the fire, the shared warmth, they had survived. And now, as they would walk together into the endless white landscape, they carried not just life, but hope, courage, and the quiet, unspoken bond forged in the coldest night of their lives, for Talon, Eliza, and June. The first steps beyond the cabin shelter were not just steps into the snow, they were steps into freedom, into survival, and into a future none of them had dared to imagine the night before. And as they stepped into the white expanse, the sun catching the glimmer of Talon's tribal jewelry, the prairie seemed less a threat and more a canvas, waiting for the stories of the lives it had nearly claimed, but which had endured.